The majority of human beings all around the globe are thinking wrong. Most people have never sat down and actually examined how they think, why they think, and what is shaping their thinking beyond the random surface thoughts that come and go every day. And that is exactly why so many people stay stuck in the same loops for years, making the same mistakes, repeating the same patterns, and calling it life. Because thinking about thinking is a skill. Just like training your body, you can train your mind. And when this skill is trained properly, it becomes one of the most powerful upgrades a human being can develop. Because you stop being trapped inside your thoughts, and you start watching them, filtering them, and controlling them. You gain an extra layer of intelligence on top of your normal thinking. In this video, we are going to break it down clearly. First, we will expose why most people think in a wrong way without even realizing it. Then, I will show you how to build the skill of thinking about thinking in a practical way, so your mind becomes your tool instead of your prison.
Our entire existence as humans starts and ends with thoughts. Without thinking, without thoughts, we would have no sense of our lives and experiences, because everything we call my life is being processed through the way we think and interpret reality. Whatever you want, whatever you desire, whatever you crave, whatever you try to understand, and whatever you feel inside yourself is always connected to your thoughts in some way. Because your thoughts are the core interface between you and reality. But what even are thoughts? How are they formed? From where do they come? Where do they go after we think them? It is one of the wildest realities of our world that we all agree thoughts are literally what give our existence a sense of meaning. Yet most people never sit down and actually think about what thoughts even are. So we start from that. We start from the foundation of the whole experience. What even are thoughts? In what forms do they exist in our minds? What elements are important inside them? And how are they shaped and influenced? And by what exactly? So let's do an experiment together to start this properly. Close your eyes and just listen to my voice. I want you to imagine this scene. It is a rainy Friday, deep within a jungle full of tall oak trees, and there is a little brown treehouse all the way on top of the trees. Inside that treehouse lives a single owl who is wearing a pink suit and drinking green tea from a hot pot. Now, as I was describing this scene, you probably saw this character and this setting inside your mind, and you imagined it clearly, even though it never happened in your real life. So here is the real question. Where exactly did that seeing happen? How did you see the exact scene I was describing, and where did it even take place inside you? Human thoughts, in the most common form, have two primary formats. The first format is visuals and pictures. The second format is sound and voices. In the most raw form, whatever you think during the day is usually one of these two formats. When you think about having food, you either see the food in your mind's eye and you feel hunger, or a narration starts moving in your head saying, "I'm hungry," or "We should grab some food." And this is a very interesting practice to do by yourself, because it quickly exposes how your mind is functioning every second without you paying attention. So, if you want to understand your own mind in a practical way, you can simply become more mindful of what you think about during the day, and label the thought based on its format, exactly like we said. You can ask yourself a very direct question in real time. Was that thought a picture, or was it a voice? But there is a third element that is extremely important, and it works like spice for food, but as spice for thoughts. That element is your emotions. You see, without the spices, food feels boring and bland.
Your thoughts function the same way. Whatever you think by itself is just a picture or a mental sound inside your head. But the moment your emotions enter the thought, everything changes. That picture gets weight. That voice gets weight. That sound and image become meaningful, personal, and real to you, because your emotions attach intensity to the thought and turn it into something that controls your focus. And this is the mechanics of how thoughts are shaped inside your mind and communicated inside you in these exact ways. So now that this is clear, the next question arises. From where do these thoughts even come from? Because these formats of thoughts, the pictures and the voices, have to come from somewhere first, right? Everything we think of mostly comes from our primary five senses, with visuals and sound being the dominant forms of sensory inputs that contribute to our inner world. Until now, if you have been paying attention, you should see a clear pathway from start to finish. You should see the whole route of where thoughts originate, how they enter you, how they get shaped, and how they become meaningful inside your mind. So let me make this more clear with one example. Imagine you spend 1 hour scrolling online, and you see a video of someone living a perfect lifestyle, traveling, looking confident, acting powerful, and showing a version of life that looks flawless. At first, you are only seeing it with your eyes and hearing it with your ears. So it is just raw sensory information. Then that sensory input turns into a picture in your mind. And that picture stays there even after you close the app. Then your inner voice starts forming a narrative around it, saying things like, "I should be doing more," or "My life is behind," or "I need to become like that," or "Why is everyone ahead of me?" Then emotions attach to that thought, and now the thought becomes heavy, meaningful, personal, and intense. And suddenly, you are not just watching content anymore. You are living inside a thought loop, inside a mental story, inside an emotional pressure that did not even exist an hour ago. This is how a simple sensory input becomes a thought, how that thought becomes a narrative, and how that narrative becomes emotional reality inside you. And once you understand this clearly, you stop treating your thinking like something random, and you start seeing it as a system that can be understood. So, now that the thinking process is crystal clear and obvious, we move into the golden question. So, how should you think about thinking? You should always be aware how much of what you think is shaped by you and how much of it is manipulated, directed, and affected by other people's perspectives, worldviews, agendas, and point of views. And you only realize that when you sit down and question your own thinking, because that is the only way you truly understand it. And that is the only way you connect deeper with your own mind, instead of being pushed around by it. Most people live in a way where a thought appears and instantly becomes truth, even though no proof exists and no real investigation happens about it. A thought feels personal because it uses your inner voice. But that voice can be built from old pain, social programming, fear, and habit. So the thought still feels real, even when it is wrong. A single thought can hijack your entire mood, your decisions, and your day. Because the mind naturally tries to complete stories and protect itself from discomfort. A perfect example shows up in the morning, when the mind produces something like, "Today is going to be a bad day," even though the day has not started and nothing has happened yet. That one thought
instantly shifts the body into heaviness, pushes motivation down, and trains the brain to search for more proof that the day is bad. Another example happens during texting, when someone does not respond for an hour, and the mind quickly fills the silence with an invented narrative, such as, "They are ignoring me," or "They are upset with me," or "I said something wrong." Emotional suffering begins before reality even arrives, because the brain starts reacting to a story instead of responding to facts. A similar trap appears in social situations, when the mind creates the belief that everyone is judging you, even though nobody has spoken and no evidence exists to support that conclusion. Tension grows, confidence drops, and the entire experience becomes uncomfortable, only because the mind generated a threat without confirmation. Comparison creates another version of the same prison, when success in someone else becomes interpreted as proof of your failure, and the mind produces lines like, "I will never get there," or "I am not built for that." The possibility of growth dies before effort begins, because the mind already declared the outcome. The same mechanism shows up after mistakes, because one moment becomes converted into identity. So one failure becomes, "I always fail," and one bad decision becomes, "I always ruin everything." A person becomes trapped when they treat temporary events as permanent truths. The problem is never the existence of thoughts, because thoughts will always exist, and the mind will always generate internal content around it. The real danger comes from automatically obeying the thought as if it is a command, instead of studying it as information. Thinking about thinking fixes this problem by building a second layer of intelligence inside your awareness. That second layer watches the thought instead of being dragged by it, and questions the thought instead of surrendering to it. Control begins the moment a person understands that noticing a thought already proves separation from it. A thought can be observed, analyzed, and reshaped, which means a thought is not the same thing as the one observing it. This is where practical thinking about thinking starts, because the goal is not to silence the mind forever, but to stop being controlled by it. 3 skills build this power in a very real way. Noticing the thought becomes the first skill. Awareness breaks the automatic trance state you are in. Labeling the thought becomes the second skill. Clarity removes confusion. Redirecting the thought becomes the third skill, because direction creates outcomes instead of loops. Noticing means catching the exact moment the inner dialogue begins, even when the thought sounds normal or harmless. A common situation happens when the mind says, "I do not want to go to the gym," and the body instantly follows that suggestion without resistance. A conscious response requires a pause that creates distance, because the thought gets seen in that space. Labeling turns that thought from a personal truth into a visible pattern you can study. The format of the thought becomes obvious once it gets inspected, because it usually arrives as an inner voice or as a mental picture. The emotion behind the thought becomes easy to identify once attention is placed on it, because resistance, fear, laziness, and insecurity each carry their own internal texture. The theme behind the thought becomes clear once the pattern is recognized, because avoidance and comfort-seeking often sit behind the same repeated excuses. Redirecting replaces obedience with choice, and that choice becomes your way to freedom. A useful redirection keeps the sentence sharp and simple, because the mind respects clarity. Life changes fast when thoughts stop controlling your every behavior. Every thought pushes a person toward a behavior, even when the behavior ends in self-destruction. Freedom becomes real when the thought gets caught early enough to interrupt the behavior.
A 5-minute daily practice trains this skill faster than random motivational quotes ever could. Stillness for 30 seconds creates the space needed to hear what the mind has been trying to hide under all the external noises.